It was one of the magnificent manors on Chicago's famed Gold Coast. Patterned after a chateau from the grounds of Versailles, this copy was completed in 1917. It then became the home of Eleanor Countess, heiress to the Diamond Match Company fortune. Hi, I'm Jim Wilhelm. Only a few of these lakefront mansions remain, and this is the only one with access to the public. But it's not a museum unto itself, nor is it a window into the lifestyles of Chicago's affluent. Today, it's the home of a unique collection. Since 1954, it's been home to the International Museum of Surgical Science, which depicts the history, the development, and advances in both surgery and related health fields. The earliest known form of surgery was called trephining, which is from a Greek word which means borer. Holes were bored in the patient's head in effort to relieve a variety of symptoms such as headaches, brain diseases, or even just to let out evil spirits. During the operation, patients did not receive anesthesia and were fully awake. Even more remarkable is that in 2/3 of the trephined skulls found, healing took place and new bone began to form, indicating that the patient survived the ordeal. Another early procedure was called vivisection, or bloodletting. Before germs were discovered, it was believed that all diseases were a result of an imbalance in bodily fluids. Unfortunately, this procedure often left the patient too weak to recover. On display are several styles of lancets used to puncture veins. This one dates from 1850. The physician would place the appropriate size blade over the vein and then hit it to puncture the blood vessel. This picture demonstrates the agony involved in another early procedure, amputation. Before anesthesias were developed, the patient might be given at most a shot of alcohol to dull the senses. And before we understood about sterilization, the physician might have sawed right through the bandage, the clothing, and everything. Here's an amputation kit from the 1800s. Surgeons would first use knives to cut the flesh and then a saw for the bone. Before anesthesia, speed was of essence when operating on a struggling patient. Most skilled surgeons could perform the procedure in as little as 30 seconds. The development of anesthesia allows the surgeon more time to operate and a chance to be more exacting in his work. This exhibit covers the effort to alleviate pain and is dominated by this portrait of Dr. Crawford Long. In 1842, he performed the first surgical procedure using ether as an anesthetic. Prior to that, ether had been used as an intoxicant at parties. Also on display are the various apparatus used to deliver the anesthesia, from inhalers to early syringes, plus bios of some of the pioneering physicians. When this was still a private home, this was the master bedroom. Today it contains an exhibit which traces the history of medical imaging, which began in 1895 when Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays. Quickly an X-ray craze spread across the globe. Professionals and amateurs both were experimenting with this new invention. Chicago, with its central location and access to transportation, soon became one of the leading manufacturers of X-ray equipment. Most of the items in this exhibit come from a Chicago doctor named Emil Gruby. In 1896, he was one of the first doctors to use X-rays in the treatment of skin disorders and cancer. This is an X-ray tube holder. It was positioned over the part of the body that was to be X-rayed or treated. But the new invention was also abused. Up until the 1940s, X-ray devices were sold as cosmetic hair removers. Women were instructed to expose their chin and upper lip for 4 minutes every 2 weeks over a period of months. Sadly, almost 1/3 of all radiation-induced cancer in women can be traced to the use of these machines. X-rays were even used in the sale of shoes. They were used to fit the shoes. This machine was introduced in the 1920s and had become very popular by the 1950s. There's an opening in the back for the customer's feet and 3 viewing ports, one for the salesperson, one for the parent, and one for the child. But as concerns grew about the dangers of exposure to X-rays, individual states began to ban the use of these devices. For most people today, their interaction with X-rays comes at the dentist's office. Behind me is the first commercially viable dental X-ray machine, which came out in 1920, which was only 25 years after X-rays were discovered. In fact, right after their discovery, X-rays were quickly accepted by the medical community. Their properties for treatment and diagnosing opened new fields. Elsewhere, another success story is retold in this small room. It was a disease that came in epidemic proportions, often striking young children, resulting in paralysis and even death. There was not then, and there is not now, any known cure. Of course, we're talking about polio, which affected thousands of children every year prior to the 1950s. This is one of the very few iron lungs left in the country. Polio can paralyze muscles, even those used for breathing. This machine used bellows to create and relieve pressure on the patient's body, helping him to breathe. Sometimes patients would have to spend weeks or months in one of these things. In 1955, in what many historians consider to be the greatest achievement of the century, Dr. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine which prevented the contracting of polio. Today, that disease has been wiped out almost worldwide, except in a few countries where there are ongoing efforts to inoculate those populations. Welcome back to the International Museum of Surgical Science in Chicago, which has this recreation of an apothecary shop from around the 1900s. All the items here, the medicines and the chemicals, are from two pharmacies, one in New York and the other from Iowa. The traditional symbol of a pharmacy, two globes of red and green water, would be displayed in the window. While no one is certain, it's thought that globes, used by alchemists to advertise their trade, were borrowed from apothecaries who used chemistry in their trade. The first job of the pharmacist was to create the medicine. They would grind down and mix the ingredients into a paste or a dough. Then that paste would be cut into individual portions and then hand-rolled into pills. But then prepackaged medicines began to hit the market, changing the pharmacy. Now customers could medicate themselves through a variety of what became known as patent medicines. There were cures for everything, from headaches to tumors, boils, and even stupidity. Unfortunately, in most of those early medicines, the main ingredient was alcohol, opium, and narcotics. Not only was it not a cure, but the patients could become addicted. In one case, one patent medicine was considered to be the cause of death in 1 out of every 1,000 people in New York City. Finally, in 1930, a law was passed forcing manufacturers to prove that the product was safe when taken according to the label's instructions. But it was not until a 1962 law that all new drugs would have to prove they performed as promised. Patent medicines were not really patented because to do so, the manufacturers would have had to reveal their content. What was copyrighted was the trademark and the shape of the bottles. But with the help of those new laws, patent medicine did change the nature of the pharmacy business. As their job of pill roller diminished, pharmacists had to come up with a new way of attracting customers. Well, since they already had the chemicals and the phosphates, some of them came up with the idea of creating flavored sodas and ice cream. And so the American institution of the soda fountain and the drugstore was born. In addition to the history of apothecary, surgery, and anesthetics, this museum has one of the most extensive exhibits of ophthalmic history found in the United States. Here, visitors can follow the development of eyeglasses and other visual aids. Welcome back to the International Museum of Surgical Science in Chicago, and one of the earliest displays, the Hall of the Immortals. These are the people who made great advances in medical science and laid the foundation for today's medical procedures. Some names are familiar, such as Hippocrates, who is called the father of medicine. He's remembered for separating medicine from superstition. But others are not so well known, such as Giovanni Morgagni, who practiced in the 1700s. He showed that bloodletting was not effective, and he brought an end to the popular concept at that time that the body was composed of 4 fluids which had to be kept in balance. And here's a likeness of the earliest known physician, Imhotep from Egypt. He's believed to be the author of the oldest known record of surgical procedures. It's a work that has been noted for its accuracy and scientific quality. As we have seen, this facility includes a wide range of fields related to the surgical sciences, and there are other rooms and other exhibits for visitors to explore. And it's all housed in one of the few remaining lakeshore homes in Chicago's Gold Coast area. For more information about the International Museum of Surgical Science, its exhibits or special events, go to their website at www.imss.org or call 312-642-6502.